Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. We are exploring, as you know, the digital revolution, all the things going on there. And certainly the year 2020 was one where we saw many companies have to rush into the whole world of digital transformation and try to figure out who do they need to be to become the sort of companies they need to be in the future, with the great acceleration behind that, of course, of the COVID pandemic. And we've seen some companies do a brilliant job of it, some not so good. And we are delighted to have today one of our monthly guests, Bonnie Tinder, who is the CEO of Raven Intel. Bonnie's got vast experience and insight into what's going on with a lot of these projects, and she's going to share some of that with us today. Bonnie, welcome back. It's always great to see you.
And likewise, also great to be here with you and with your listeners.
Bonnie, thanks. So I hope I didn't spill any of the beans there on what you've got going on, but talk a little bit, please, about, the perspective that Raven Intel has on these sorts of projects and what you've got for us today that allows, that's going to offer some very interesting insights into how these big projects are going.
Absolutely. So the company founded, which is Raven Intel, we measure the voice of the customer. That is what we look at very closely, and we look at the voice of the customer as it relates to enterprise software implementation success. And the way that we get our insights are through peer reviews. So just like you would write a Yelp review about a local restaurant, our visitors have the opportunity to review a large digital implementation or digital transformation project that they just went through. And so we collect feedback from a variety of types of customers, industries, the type of software, as well as the scope of project that they worked on. But that collective wisdom really helps inform future customers about, who are the best SIs, what are the best systems in terms of the implementation effort. And so what I thought would be interesting to talk about with you today is about what we found in 2020. I mean, as we've talked about, it was an absolutely different landscape in terms of project work in the digital transformation world last year, and some really interesting findings that I've seen from customers based on the review data that we have. Over 1,000 reviews is what I'll be speaking about today.
Bonnie, it's funny, since you have been a guest here with us on Cloud Wars Live for the last several months, and you describe Raven Intel as what it does, a little bit like Yelp. I tend to notice a little more Yelp reviews when I happen to see them. I don't go on the Yelp site and look through them, but I saw one the other day. It's about a restaurant that I happen to like quite a bit. And the comment was like, this place is rotten. And I was sort of hurt by that. So it's interesting how, I don't own that restaurant. I haven't been there in a while, clearly, but those things, we take it to heart. So people reveal in these reviews something that you can't always tell from just sort of sterile data or numbers about it. So I think it's very intriguing the way that you're going to be able to have these firsthand impressions, these firsthand accounts, and these firsthand opinions about how some of these incredibly important projects have come along here. So I'm going to turn it over to you and be quiet, and you can share some of those very, very interesting findings you've come up with.
Absolutely. And Bob, just sort of expanding upon, your Yelp experience, we certainly see projects that are not rated well, just like, that one restaurant that you saw rated. With that said, one project does not represent, or one customer's opinion doesn't represent the overall body of work of, let's say, an SI, or the systems implementer consulting firm, or that software vendor. That's, sort of a point in time experience. And it is really when we can take a step back and get a bird's eye view, looking collectively at a good quantity of data, that we're really able to spot trends and understand, okay, so what's the overall satisfaction rate with some of these things? And so, what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of those, again, the bird's eye view, thus the name Raven Intel, is to provide those sort of insights. And there's amazing projects that we had there, and there's certainly the fair ones and the ones that have some trouble spots. So I'll talk about some of those things. I think the biggest trend that we saw last year was the difference in the type of project work that was going on. We saw a higher volume of phase 2 projects or optimization. And by that, what we consider phase 2 is a customer or company might have an existing piece of software in place, and they have added additional modules to that or additional functionality. They've expanded the scope of work that particular software was done, or they had this software in place and they've really wanted to optimize it. They might have implemented it last year, but it really wasn't functioning to the level or being used to the level that was optimal. So those type of projects last year increased by 25%. We saw somewhat fewer of the phase 0 or 1 type of projects, and those were the full, from 0 to 60 installs, right? The full suite implementations. Those are the ones that millions of dollars, years in the works. And we saw some fewer of those. Those were down 10%. The hot industries for digital projects or acceleration would be healthcare, as you might imagine, manufacturing, and both of those were up about 15% from previous years in terms of the quantity of projects that we saw come through, and government, that was up about 4%. The one thing across the board, regardless of industry, is that in 48% of the project reviews that we had last year, the scope of the project changed while in flight. So they either culled it down because they had a different initiative that they were doing, or they had to lay off staff, so they didn't have the availability of resources, or in some cases, they actually had to add on additional aspects of the project. So 48% of the time, that project was different than what they thought going in last year, and that's higher than in previous years.
Bonnie, could you just on that last point, that 48% is higher? Is it wildly higher, or what's a typical year adaptation of this scale and scope of a project?
It's a great question. In previous years, that number is more like in the 30% range. About 30 to 35% of the time, the customer says, we changed the scope of the project, and it wasn't like something was missed and and they didn't catch this, and I had lots of change orders. This year, though, that was up about 15%, where the customer said, look, or I'm sorry, even more than that. So 48%, so 18% almost. The customer said, we changed the scope of work. It had nothing to do with the fact that, our vendor didn't identify or, do a proper discovery of the project.
So an indicator that the rate of change that we see all around us is really picking up, and that's going to, it seems, Bonnie, be sort of a fact of life going forward. So maybe that heightened range of adjustment and course correction in the middle of a project, is that going to be sort of the norm going forward?
A huge trend that we saw is this idea that customers, what was most important about the project or the strength of the SI or the vendor that was helping them is this idea of flexibility, adaptability, agility. And so that was called out by customers and projects that were successful. I think that what happened in the last year is that this idea of, okay, we need to be adaptable, we need to be agile in our process. That was a necessary, situation. Everybody had to be flexible last year due to, a change that it seemed like happened every week, and I think that we'll see going forward that, it's just going to be, people are more used to this idea of, of having to be adaptable and being flexible to change.
Yeah. So, Bonnie, what uh, I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead on you here, but as you described this, especially in such a tumultuous year as 2020, what were your findings on the overall happiness or satisfaction of the
Yeah.
outcomes?
Here's the thing that surprised me is that customers are actually happier with the outcomes of these projects than in previous years. So, we asked three types of questions about customer satisfaction. How satisfied were you with your software vendor? How satisfied were you with your SI or the consulting firm that helped you? And then also, how satisfied were you with this particular project? So
Mhm.
that's the culmination of all of those things working together. And overall, we saw a full point higher increase in satisfaction in all three areas. So in previous years, that number was approximately an average of 7 out of 10. Some degree of in the sevens out of 10 for each one of those different things. Last year, we actually saw that raised to 8. And, I think probably customers were a little bit more forgiving in
Mhm.
general due to all of the changes in terms of their satisfaction. But I think, the other thing is the expectations and the sort of the scope of projects were probably locked down a little bit better due to, constraints with time and budget. And maybe as a result of that, customers were able to have a more defined sort of scope of work and happier as a result of the outcomes.
Hmm. That's that's wild. Would you ever have expected that?
I wouldn't. I'll tell you the other thing that I didn't necessarily expect, and that is the on time and on budget delivery rates were up as well. And so we saw an increase of 10% in on time delivery and about an 8% increase in on budget delivery. Now, our delivery range is still, about 60% of the time a project is delivered on time and on budget, and about 40% were late. So, I mean, we're still not hitting out of the park here. But on the other hand, that's definitely an improvement from 2019 and 18, where that hovered around the 50% range. So, I think part of that might have been due to the fact that the projects were somewhat smaller in nature. They were optimization projects or phase two type of things. But also those contributing factors, the fact that things are more predictable in terms of on time, on budget, I think could be correlated to satisfaction rates as well.
Wow. Remarkable. Great insights, Bonnie, on this. There are probably some heroes in here as well, right? And I know Raven Intel looks at both the rating for the partner, the integrator that went along, as well as the software vendor. So,
Yeah.
who came out of this sparkling?
Yeah. So, I think there were bright spots in each one of the software ecosystems that we look at. So we look at ServiceNow, SAP, Oracle, uh, Ultimate Software, Unit 4, and and Workday. And so in every single one of those software areas, we had projects that met and exceeded the expectations of customers. And I think that where there were success themes or those bright spots really had to do with some of the SIs and the vendors who really went above and beyond expectations for customers. And the comments that I heard from on these reviews was our vendor SI was flexible with our changing needs. They had a strong understanding of the broader business challenges that we were faced with. Our vendor was willing to adapt to our changes. And I think that, when I see those type of comments on reviews, that really reflects well on the software and SI relationship that was built. And I think, we talked about on our last podcast, but the heroes through the tumultuous 2020 year, I think, are the ones that really are going to reap the rewards this year with, more projects and additional work from customers who really were, were satisfied in, despite all the pandemic challenges that happened.
Bonnie, that's so interesting. As you say, the responsiveness, the flexibility, the agility of the partners and the software companies, it's wild. And we recently did this thing we called the CEO Cloud Outlook 2021, in which we talked to the CEOs of a number of the major vendors. And it's interesting how many of them directly or indirectly locked in on this point of saying, these customers of ours, many of them are hurting, and they're either hurting because their industry's way down, they're hurting because of the incredible challenges they've had to overcome, or in some ways not so much hurting, but they're struggling to keep up with the just extraordinary growth and demand on their products and services that are being placed. So it's good to see that this sort of maturation, right? I think of the cloud industry overall has sort of come around from, it wasn't that many years ago when it was the cloud vendors that sort of drove the agenda. Here's the products we're going to make. Here's what we're going to call them. Here's what we're going to offer to you. Here's all the other stuff that you have to put together by yourself. So I think this has been a real growing up period over the last year or so. And it sounds very much like the data that you're reflecting from your surveys here would be in line with that.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt, without a doubt. And, there was a lot of work that was done last year for free, software that was given, or price breaks that were had. I know a couple of the SIs were really squeezed by customers because they, customer had, change in their ability to, to budget for new work and things like that. And so I think, again, that idea of flexibility and personalization, based on customer needs, was something that will be rewarded in the coming years with loyalty.
And Bonnie, did the data reveal to you anything about, if you want to call them either mistakes or challenges that people have to learn to overcome more effectively?
Yeah. So I think there are, a couple that continue to come up. And I would say these are not drastically different than what we have heard in years past, but the sticky wickets that I continue to hear as problems, number one, are external integrations. And this idea of connecting multiple systems together customers are not really thinking through that or truly understanding the effort involved there. That is a huge sticky wicket when you're trying to get multiple systems to talk to each other. It's great to say, oh, we have an integrated system, it's all in one, but that's rare, right? You rarely have a system it's just completely on its own. So this idea of integrations always comes up as a challenge. I think the other thing is this idea of garbage in and garbage out, and having data that is bad and bringing that into a new system is a recipe for disaster. So when data is not cleaned up before customers bring it into a new system, guess what? Now that new system is going to be crappy too. And so that's the second thing is the idea that you bring over good data and processes that that will make your new system shine. There's a difference. The third thing is there's a difference between a system go live and actually living in the system. And so much of the time, customers and vendors celebrate this idea of go live, a project go live, yay! And they have cakes and they take pictures, and isn't that great? But the reality is that's really when sort of the work begins. And there's a difference between go live and actually living in the system. And sometimes, customers do not spot the errors right away. It takes a cycle or two, or sometimes 10 to understand, like, uh-oh, this wasn't converted correctly. And now, we have 2 months of cleanup to do based on what went wrong here. So This idea of go live is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. So it takes a while in order to really have a new system mature to the point where it's fully functional.
Well, Bonnie, that's a great point. It's like don't get false goals or objectives in line. That going live is great, but it's a step in a longer journey. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, Bonnie, give me a second here. I'm going to offer a word from our sponsor, BMC. BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? That's when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/A game. So, Bonnie, almost, in light of that, there's this A game notion there that BMC had talked about. I have heard a number of big software companies say that uh, we have crossed a threshold in 2020 about being able to do things digitally, being able to do things remotely with customers. So in a lot of cases, they say, we're able to install a big new system without ever or very minimal on-site presence there. So what do you think, and what did you find from the data here in the survey is about remote project delivery? How real is that as something that's going to endure?
Yeah, I think remote project delivery is here to stay. The whole idea of work from home and distributed work environments is here, and it's the future as well. And I think what people have realized is that the expense of T&E and the inefficiencies of always having to be on site doesn't add that much to a project. Certainly there are milestones where it's amazing to be face to face and build relationships and deepen relationships. And it's not to take away from that. With that said, though, I think one of the huge learnings of 2020 was that projects can be deployed very efficiently in a distributed work environment. Especially when you're dealing with large teams, and there's definitely cost to be saved there.
So, Bonnie, I had a couple follow-up things for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Um, One is, can you give us a sense of how often you might be able to share these sort of findings? Is this an annual opportunity or every 6 months?
Yeah. So the reviews that we have about SIs and software vendors are available real time on our site, and ravenintel.com customers and vendors can go out and look, and we welcome having you read the reviews that are out there. In terms of the aggregate insights, those are available quarterly. And what's really interesting is certainly looking back at 2020, that's hugely interesting. But even on a quarterly basis, there are certain project trends per quarter that all of a sudden are starting to come to light that I'm seeing. So, projects in Q4 are typically not as happy as those in Q3. I'm now seeing that by having the benefit of 3 years of data since I've started collecting that. So, Bob, the long-winded answer to your question is that that this is available quarterly. We'll be putting it and publishing it out on our website quarterly as well.
All right. All right. And Bonnie, three quick questions here. One, two about language and one about your flowers. Where I am here in late January, it is very cold. And so it is wonderful to see flowers. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, definitely, definitely. So I'm in Chicago, and I wish I could look out my window and see flowers. Unfortunately, I only see snow. But yes, it's great to have my indoor blooms here. They keep me happy.
Perfect. And Bonnie, a couple minutes ago, as you were going into some detail about one of the findings, you were using the term sticky wicket. Now, I learned about that 100 years ago when I was a kid. I was a baseball fan, and the team I followed was the Pittsburgh Pirates. And they had a guy from the Bahamas on the team, Andre Robertson. And he grew up playing cricket, and he would always talk about a sticky wicket. And so I learned that from the announcers, that what that was. But for people who haven't, aren't cricket fans, or perhaps weren't the fans of the Pirates with Andre Robertson, what's a sticky wicket?
So, and I don't know too much about cricket. When I think about a sticky wicket, it's about croquet. And so I
Uh-huh.
grew up and we played a lot of croquet. And so the sticky wicket was the one that, like, you had grass and you couldn't get your ball through it. So yeah.
A very tough angle.
Yes.
You're hoping there'll be a bend in gravity or something to get it through. And
Yes.
Bonnie, often on your blackboard in our sessions, you've got a word of the month. Anything you've got good back here?
Yes, and in fact, this is one of my takeaways from this session. So this whole idea of know your why, and I was thinking through these 2020 metrics and about, okay, so if you're doing a project in 2021, what what can some of these what was done in 2020 help a person that might be considering a project in 2021. So know your why is probably the overarching number one piece of advice I would have, is this idea that the only time that you should do a project is that you truly understand what's the business issue and what's the business goal. A digital transformation is only going to work if there's actually a business transformation that happens. And I think the clearer that you can get with your goals and the outcome and consistently measuring against that, and communicating that not just to your executive sponsor, but to every person on the team, I think that will ensure success more so than, oh, we're implementing Workday or we're implementing SAP. I mean, that so much of, the devils in the details, gets the overarching reason that you're doing a project gets lost when you're in the weeds. And I think the clearer that you can make this why, the more on track your project will be.
Bonnie, that's a great explanation. It makes, a ton of sense. It's going to be more important going forward. And I have to tell you, there was a little bit of I was trying to force this idea out of my head, this memory, but it kept coming back in. So again, back in my childhood days, I found in grade school at the Catholic school I went to, I often got paddled. That was the what. And I knew when I was getting paddled, and afterward, I sure remembered it, but I failed to understand why. And I didn't dig enough into knowing the why was I getting paddled. So if you had just explained this to me, I mean, you weren't around, but when I was in grade school, but boy, I wish I knew then what I just learned now.
That's right. And think of a failed project as a paddle. You don't want that.
Well, Bonnie, that is perfect. That's perfect. Great stuff here. It's good to see you again. Thanks for sharing the ideas, the data, the big trends, the orchids, and know your why.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, everybody, and thanks for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. As Bonnie said, at the Raven Intel site, there's lots of good data there and lots of good things to check out. Bonnie's been a tremendous addition to Cloud Wars Live, and we're thrilled to be able to have her each month to share some of these insights. So thanks for being with us. Stay warm out there, and we look forward to seeing you next time.